Welcome to HiveMind. This is Edge with my co-host Speaker. Hey, Speaker, what's new?
It's been a hectic couple of weeks. What's new with you?
The usual, just treading water in this crazy storm we call 2020.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy year, I think, for everyone.
Absolutely. It's been a terrible year for a lot of people. I'd say most people, actually.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about some of the ways that people have been hit the hardest in 2020, especially with these draconian lockdowns and the real epidemics that are on the rise as a result. And we're going to talk specifically about addiction, abuse, and suicide on the rise this year. So, Speaker,
Well,
I
we
think
can we can we can call it the shadow pandemic because there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
that's a good way to put it. Absolutely. It needs to be brought to the forefront and not be in the shadows. Speaker, I think probably everyone out there listening can relate to at least one of these things, whether they're experiencing it personally and going through it, or they know someone who is. And I don't know if everybody could say the exact same thing about the actual coronavirus pandemic, like serious cases of it, knowing someone or going through that themselves. What do you think?
I actually don't know anyone that's had it or gone through it. It's all the other things that are really hitting more than anything else for me, anyway.
Right. Is the experiences, personal or knowing someone who's going through depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, addiction, abuse, all of these things as a result of the lockdowns. So it really does beg the question, is the human toll taken from these draconian measures worse than the actual pandemic itself?
Um, I think so, definitely. In a lot of places.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. And that's something that we are really going to talk about today and break down. I'm going to start with the issue of abuse and with the added stresses of many people losing their jobs, the isolation, the racial tensions, riots in the streets, tyrannical governments imposing draconian measures, everything. Everyone is really feeling the anxiety from it all, and it's like we're living in a pressure cooker, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's what it feels like to me. And some people deal with it better than others, obviously. Some people are already hot tempered and possibly even abusive. So, of course, these added stresses have amplified their tendencies that they already had. So, it's no wonder that violent domestic abuse has spiked this year. Say, take Massachusetts, for example. Doctors in Boston, they saw nearly double the amount of domestic abuse injuries over the last year. And not only that, but the types of injuries were dramatically more severe. A couple hospitals in Boston reported physical abuse was 80% higher in 2020 than in all the 3 years earlier combined. So that is a major increase there. And not only that, but the research suggests that because of COVID and the lockdowns, many of the victims weren't coming forward right away with abuse and with their injuries. They were putting it off until the abuse got really, really severe. So the types of injuries are much more severe, is what's being reported. It's terrible.
And look, this is happening all over the world. I mean, in Australia, there was a rise in domestic cases, I think, by over half from what is usually reported. That's a massive increase, and some of the call centers were completely just couldn't handle it. They didn't have enough people on staff. They didn't really expect this because domestic violence domestic violence, abuse, domestic sexual abuse, everything like that. These things thrive in isolation. So this is the perfect environment, say, for an abusive husband to his wife, to his kids, to really get control of that situation and really make things 10 times worse for the people living in this isolated state. I mean, you can't, well, this is in some states, so like just take Victoria, for example. You can't go 5 kilometers from your house. You can't have any visitors to your house. So it's just, some houses out there must be absolutely places of horror at the moment.
It's terrible to think about this. But of course, the most innocent and defenseless among us are being hit the hardest with all of this. I mean, at the height of the worldwide lockdowns, 1.5 billion kids weren't able to go to school. So these kids who are in abusive households were stuck there, confined with their abusers. And the problem is on the reporting side of things, because these kids aren't able to go to school. They're not seeing other children or teachers or school officials or school bus drivers, anybody else who would report abuse issues. And it's not as though their abusers at home are going to be doing any of the reporting. So even when the abuse reports are low, the actual abuse that's seen, say, in hospitals is dramatically more severe. And it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. When you think about the sex abuse as well, there's a whole other aspect to it because first of all, sex abuse hotlines have been seeing a major increase in underage people during these lockdowns. But since the lockdowns, predators have been targeting kids online a lot more. And because during the lockdowns and during this time where everybody's home, they're online much more, and particular children. So, many of these predators are targeting and grooming children online much, much more. In fact, reporting shows that during the lockdowns, there was a 50% increase in child abuse images online. And many of those images are of children who have been groomed by online predators to perform sex acts on webcams. It's a major issue.
I mean, it was a major issue before this pandemic. But now it's made it 10 times worse.
Right.
And it's giving them a sense of protection as well.
Right, because predators are seeing an opportunity there. So the toll that these draconian measures have taken on people around the world is just immeasurable. And it's gut-wrenching to think about the most vulnerable among us who have had to endure it. So what exactly do we do about it?
You got me on that. I don't know. Well, what do we do about it?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do is open everything up, I mean, around the world, we need to see things start opening up again. And we need to see our leaders held accountable for these consequences of the lockdowns and vote them out if they're not going to open things up. Kids need to be back in school. Businesses need to be open. Churches need to be open.
Yeah, like, so we're seeing in Victoria now, there's no cases of coronavirus yet. We're still locked down. Works are still, businesses are still locked down. Mask mandates are still in place. Kids can't go to school. I mean, there was a report the other day, it's a little bit off topic, but not completely off topic, that 4 babies died in Adelaide, just one state over, from Victoria, because they couldn't get any, they couldn't get them on these heart machines that they didn't have in Adelaide, but they had them in other states. And because of these laws, the border laws, these 4 kids died because they weren't allowed to go across the border. Babies.
I can't imagine the actual cost of the lockdowns on human life, mental health, all of these things. There's no way to measure it.
There's no way to measure it, and like it. I guess this is why we wanted to talk about it, because we wanted to give it some sort of a voice. It's not the easiest thing to talk about. or to even formulate properly. But we need to talk about these things, and they need to be talked about because they do kind of link together. I mean, that's why we kind of put addiction uh, in with this as well, because I think there is like this vicious cycle of these things going around, say from abuse to uh, the victims then either becoming suicidal because of the abuse that they suffer, or becoming addicted to something to help them escape their situation. So I think a lot of these things are very much connected, and it's very much uh, a real evil cycle.
They are connected, most definitely. And yeah, I do think that they have been extremely amplified by these measures that have been placed on everyone around the world. So another thing I think we need to do to go after on the abuse side of things is going after the predators and rescuing the victims. In the U.S., the DOJ announced just about a month or so ago $100 million dollars in grant money, and this was for states and local authorities to create forces to go after predators and rescue kids and victims, as well as to provide some, victim assistance and so forth. And this was modeled after Operation Not Forgotten in Georgia, but they want to copy that and carry it throughout the country. But in Operation Not Forgotten, they located and rescued 39 children. And then just last week, DHS just launched this first ever integrated law enforcement operations center. It's kind of an all-in-one command center for criminal investigations, victim assistance, intelligence analysis, and training to specifically combat human trafficking and child sexual exploitation. So I see that there are being measures taken to actually make this a priority and go after it really, really hard like never before. And I'm glad to see this happen. We've got to make this a priority.
I'm glad something's being done. Yeah, I mean it's very easy uh, during these times for certain governments not to give a shit. I mean, I can only talk about here in Melbourne because it's the thing that's surrounding me the most. The only thing that's really happened to my knowledge to help is a $12 million grant to help mental health, which $12 million is absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it really gets the attention that it needs. And when we talk about mental health, we really do need to talk about, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, because that is one of, the biggest issues right now with these lockdowns and with these draconian measures. One of the toughest things that we've each had to face, and as a society that we've had to face, and you mentioned this, is the isolation. And, people go into severe depression, and that can ultimately lead to suicide. Cases of anxiety disorder are 3 times higher in 2020 than in 2019. And depressive disorder is 4 times higher than in 2019. And twice as many people have reported serious consideration of suicide compared to 2018. So that shows me that this is a major, major issue, and it's been exacerbated with these lockdowns.
Yeah, it's becoming more of a problem than this pandemic. But of course, mainstream media will never admit it. Politicians will hardly admit it in any way, shape, or form because they can't really call this out because they can't really be seen as wrong with their actions, as we see with most politicians, people of power.
Yeah, I mean, you compare the media coverage of the coronavirus deaths, which gets 24/7 wall-to-wall coverage. I mean, with all of the fear and the alarmism of it all and the sensationalism of it all. And you compare that to this, as you referred to it, the shadow pandemic, and it gets hardly any reporting at all. But the truth is, nearly half of the Americans have reported that coronavirus lockdowns were harming their mental health. And federal emergency hotlines for people in emotional distress have registered more than 1,000% increase compared to the previous year. So this is a major issue, and it is a shadow pandemic. And again, I'm going to say that we can't have a solution that's worse than the problem. Statistics show that when unemployment increases, the suicide rate increases. So, say, for example, if the unemployment rate increases 5%, statistics show from previous years that that will equate to another possible 4,000 suicides and 4,800 drug overdoses. And so if you see how important the economy is and how important employment is and how important opening businesses back up is to deaths with suicide and drug overdoses, then you can clearly see how these draconian measures are a direct link to it.
Yeah, so we have businesses in Melbourne that are hemorrhaging like 25K a week.
Oh my gosh.
And like this is in central Melbourne, so bars and clubs are the majority that are getting hit with that. Also gyms in prestigious spots. How are you supposed to sustain yourself after that? I mean, a lot of these businesses will never open again. That's 100% certain. And who knows what is going to happen to a lot of people that either run those things or work those things, because it's a lot of money to hemorrhage, man, and the government's not going to help much with it. You know, there's some people that are in lucky fields, and they're the ones that I've noticed on Facebook that are just like, hey, let's just stay locked down forever. It's okay because you guys still have jobs, and you guys are still getting paid, and you guys are still on government payrolls. It's quite easy for you. You know, it's the people that own businesses, run businesses, and that employ people, the ones that are really copying it. Well, from where I am anyway, it's a lot of responsibility.
It is, and it spills over. See, once you start losing business or your business shuts down completely, you start having financial troubles. That starts affecting relationships. You start having marital issues, makes you depressed. Then there comes the suicidal thoughts, the addiction. It's all just this nasty chain of events, isn't it?
Mm.
And millions of people are going through this around the world. One segment of the population that's been hit particularly hard by this epidemic is our military and our veterans. Military suicides have increased as much as 20% this year compared to last year. About 20 veterans and active duty military personnel do die by suicide each day. And that's just according to the latest figures that we have, which are like a 2-year lag. So we don't even really know how the pandemic has affected them. But just anecdotally, I've seen a lot of people, say, for example, on Twitter, veterans in particular, who are going through these issues of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. It's a huge problem. And I'm really feeling for them, but it's not just veterans. It's all different walks of life who are suffering from anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. This issue has to be brought to the forefront because without a doubt, in my opinion, these draconian measures that have happened around the world are taking a huge toll on the mental health of people. What do you think?
The mental health and the addiction side of things as well. Addictions have gone through the roof. So that is something that I really did want to touch on as well, because I think it's important at the moment, because a lot of people seem to seem to be addicted to something, maybe even just generally, even before this pandemic. But it's either heightened or gotten worse, or
Yeah. And I want to spend a good amount of time talking about that. First, though, I do want to drop some phone numbers for people just to help out in reference to anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. There is a phone number. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273-TALK. So we'll put that up on the screen. And then there's a crisis text line as well that you could text 24/7. That number's 741-741. But I do think it's really interesting and a great move and notable is that Trump just signed a bill last week to make 988 the universal suicide hotline. That doesn't begin until 2022, so just keep that in mind. But that's huge. I mean, like 911 is so easy to call, and everybody knows 911 here, so in the US. But so to have a hotline where it's just 988 to call that if you're having suicidal thoughts, I can imagine that that's going to actually make a difference.
yeah, it's actually a really, really good idea. And I don't know why it wouldn't be something that was, implemented before.
I know, right?
Hmm.
Such a simple thing, but could really make a difference. And it's pathetic that it hasn't happened before. Um, but I'm glad to see things are happening now. But we do want to move on and talk about addiction. I know that's something that's very personal to you, and I'm going to hand you the floor here in a second to talk about that. But first, I'm going to throw some statistics out there before I do. Um, so, in the U.S. last year, drug overdoses killed approximately 72,000 Americans. And this year, drug overdoses have spiked by at least 18%. And one thing I want to talk about also is just when you couple the fentanyl that's really deadly and it's flooding into our country, but you couple that with the isolation that people are under during lockdowns, that's just a really deadly combination, isn't it?
More than deadly. I mean, you add some domestic abuse in there as well, and you've got a whole pot of issues.
Yeah, yeah. So, Speaker, I want to hand the floor over to you. I know this is a topic that's important to you and personal to you. Tell me your thoughts and your personal experience, as well as what you think about, how these draconian measures have made the drug addiction problem worse.
Um, I'm a person that has a very addictive personality, and if anyone's followed me for a long time, I've always been a pretty outspoken advocate for those recovering from any sort of addiction, but mostly hard drugs. I've talked about this in the past. We've made a video about this in the past. That earlier in my life, I was a meth addict. So coming out of that, I know what a lot of these people go through. I know why a lot of these people do it. And I also know how extremely hard it is to get out of it. And that's one benefit you can have from being on the other side of the tracks. And I'm definitely not alone in that. I know a lot of people, and it's strange that a lot of people in this movement that we're in, call it whatever you will, truth movement, great awakening, whatever, have a lot of them have seemed to have some serious prior uh, issues, either addiction or abuse or something that's happened to them, and seem to help them or push them by getting through it or getting over it or conquering it in some way that has led them onto like a higher path. It's very strange, but I've met a lot of people that similar things to me or gone through similar things through me that are now making content like I'm making content and are
Yeah,
trying to
this It's really cool to see that, to see people making it out the other side of their own personal journeys and then go moving on and growing to help others. And it is really interesting that sort of evolution where once you kind of go through hell, your own personal hell, how it does kind of change your perspective and help you see the world a little bit differently. It helps you wake up. So it is interesting how a lot of people in this movement have had their own personal hells and have come out the other side and do have a lot of things that they can share with others to help them.
And it's. I hope I have in some way with the videos that I've made or something inspired people to do that. This last week or so is another thing, because while I was in lockdown, while I'm still in lockdown, there's really two things I've always had a problem with in my life. Meth was one of them, um, and tobacco was the other one. Tobacco, nicotines. I was a pack-a-day smoker. I needed cigarettes. I I think I've been about 10 days without a smoke now, and that's probably 10 days in about 20 years that I've been without a smoke.
That is so good. I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. That is really
Yeah,
actually a huge thing.
I'm pretty happy with myself, but like as you might tell, even on here, probably in the Digger podcast tomorrow as well, I'm a little bit out of it. There's a lot of changes that are going on here. I've been through it before. It's definitely not as bad as meth withdrawal, I'll tell you that much. Um, but it's still hard. There's there's still a road to go through after this. But with these things, I feel they are a personal challenge in a way too. I mean, I also think there's a lot of psychological reasons around addictions and why people get addictions, not just the chemical compound and the addictive compounds that are made up in certain things. But I also think there's a mental uh, masochistic nature about why people do
For
these things.
me, because I went through addiction when I was younger too, when I was a teen and in my early 20s. And for me, it was about masking pain and covering things up that I didn't want to face. And it was just basically to avoid reality because some things were too hard to accept. So I think that that may be the case for a lot of people. Also, for me, it was a total lack of self worth. I may have had suicidal thoughts, but I never attempted suicide. But I was just more reckless because I didn't value my life. And I think that that is probably a similar feeling across the board for many people.
Yeah, definitely escapism is a big part of it. And there's reasons why a lot of people want to escape. The world is hard to deal with for a lot of people. That's why they do these things. On the other hand, though, coming out of it, that there's nothing I like more than a good comeback story. I think good comeback stories are amazing, and I think people that have gone through this stuff, and it seems a lot. Like when I put a message out on Twitter the other day, it seems like a lot of people have gone through this roller coaster of smoking and stuff as well. But I believe coming out on the other side of an addiction can really help an individual. In my case, my first serious addiction, getting over ice, after that is when I actually started making content, is when I started to make this channel. And okay, like it wasn't directly after, but if I was still doing it, there's no way that I would be making content and stuff now. Not at all. Right? So I'm hoping through this next step, for this next smoking step, is that I can lift it up a little bit more. But you just have to go through that painful couple of weeks, that painful 2-3 weeks where there's a lot of things changing. and that goes for a different variety of things. Alcoholism might take longer to recover from, but even if you're going through that, whatever you're going through, it's really worth it to get to the other side. And it's really worth giving yourself an opportunity to be better.
It is. And if you're experiencing, I want to talk to the audience for a second here. If you're experiencing any of these issues, you know, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, addiction, do not go it alone. Talk to someone, a friend, a family member, a doctor, a hotline, whatever. But just talk to someone, because that is the most important thing, that you are not alone and that you know that. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, speaker?
Just that it's worth it.
A couple of other things I want to say before we close out. Speaking to you guys who are listening out there, anyone who's going through this, just know that even if you can't realize it right now, your life is precious. Your life has meaning and purpose. And most of all, you are loved. Just remember that, okay? We love you all. Yes. And we'll see you back next time, right here on Hive Mind.